Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank IBM and GovExec for having, hosting this event, but also asking me to be one of the speakers. And I'd like to apologize to everyone that I may be a little sad during my presentation. I found out during Mr. Wallace's presentation that apparently I was one of those officers they've been trying to get rid of for the last 30 years. They didn't give me my branch. They didn't send me where I wanted to go, and they didn't send me to grad school. I didn't realize that was to try to get rid of me. Mr. Wallace stole a lot of my thunder. He talked about many of the things that I was hoping to talk about today. But what I want to do is kind of go a little bit deeper into the dirt of trying to do one of these systems and the warts that you run into when you're trying to create an analytic system. So the first thing I want to do is talk about a program called EMDS. EMDS is the Enterprise Management Decision Support Tool. It is an Army analytics system that is evolving slowly into predictive analytics. And it has been around now for about half a dozen or so years. The mission of EMDS is to reach across the Army, grab as much data as we can get our hands on, bring that back into one place, and present that in a common, holistic way while providing analytics on top of that. So why EMDS? One of the things that Mr. Wallace talked about, we've got a lot of systems in the Army. He talked about 250 HR systems and systems for the reserves versus the active duty and for the National Guard and so on. There are over 3,700 IT systems in the Army's inventory that are documented. And I stress documented. We have a system called the Army Portfolio Management Solution. Those 3,700-ish systems are in there. We uncover systems every single day that have never been in APMS. So we have a lot of systems that are stovepiped out there that don't do a lot of work together. We also have a need for near real-time access to this information. Imagine 3,700 systems trying to get into those, collate data, pull data out, provide it to a senior leader so that they can make a decision with that. It's extremely difficult. And some of these systems update their data daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, even in some cases yearly. We also have a lack of standards. Now, if you ask certain people in the Army, we do have lots of standards. The problem is none of us actually follow those standards. And so it has created a lack of standards in how we do business. Now, part of that is because of necessity, as Mr. Wallace pointed out. I believe he said COBOL was a system and millions of lines of code that existed in order to be able to do this. We have some systems that have been around a long time that have not ever had a standard and don't follow today's standards because it would just be too expensive in order to try to make that happen. Not all of our systems are total Army. We have three components in the Army. We have the active duty Army, we have the Army Reserve, and we have the National Guard. And we call it an Army of one. Unless you ask the commander of any one of those three, then it's an Army of three, and then we kind of go out from there. So a lot of times we develop systems that kind of look like other systems, that kind of look like other systems, and they kind of share information together because the governor of the state of Georgia, which is where I'm from, by the way, with this accent, if he wants to do certain things, he gets to do those things because he's also the adjutant general or the commander-in-chief for the Georgia Guard. We also have a need for one question and one answer. We saw the demonstration earlier up there with Watson Analytics, how we were literally asking a question and we were getting an answer. The problem in the Army is, and I'm sure this is across DOD and most of your government agencies, is that when you ask a question, it depends on who you ask that question of as to what that answer is going to be coming back to you, because they all have a slant on what the answer should be, as well as they may or may not have access to certain pieces of key information. When you have a large big data analytics system, now you've got a place to kind of go ask the question and get a more consistent answer, not necessarily the right answer every time. And then the last thing is we have an evolving Strategic Predictive Analytics need. And this is evolving. Our need exists today. Our ability to actually deliver it is the part that's actually evolving. You all deal with predictive analytics every single day in your own personal lives. We do some of it inside of the Army, which I'll talk about a little bit, and as Mr. Wallace mentioned. But we need to do more of it, and we need to use our data more intelligently. So this all led to a big data analytics system that's evolving into predictive analytics. So EMDS, the overview for EMDS is we really are a senior leader decision support tool. Can we provide a foundation of data that helps people who have been in the Army for 20, 25, 30, 35 years make better decisions? And that's really the premise of what we're trying to do here. We pull this data from across the Army, as I mentioned. We have a lot of classified data, so we pull that data and we keep it on the SIPRNet, or our classified network. And then we have this challenge of being able to present a total Army solution. So all that is basically ends up with, we need access, which creates understanding, which leads to discovery. And let me talk about that a little bit and talk about the information. As Mr. Wallace was talking about earlier, we have tremendous amount of data on our soldiers. But the soldiers, when you're making decisions out there, are just one piece of the equation. We also have information on equipment, and we have millions of pieces of equipment. Information on installations, so every Army post, National Guard post, Army Reserve post, Marine Corps, Air Force, because we utilize those as well sometimes. Training. We do a lot of training in the Army. As a matter of fact, when we're not at war, we spend the majority of our time training for when we may have to go to war. And then we have this thing called readiness. And the readiness is where you start to combine all of those together, where you say, I've got 100 soldiers, but of those 100 soldiers, 80 of those are actually ready to go to war. And I've got 50 pieces of equipment, and of those 50 pieces of equipment, 40 of those are ready to go to war. So the number, the 1.1 million number that Mr. Wallace is talking about, gets reduced almost immediately based on actual physical ability, training ability for the soldiers, and then the equipment. Is that equipment available to us, and is that equipment actually usable for us? So this is the big picture view of our data access. If you've seen an OV1 before, operational view, you've seen something like this before. But when you look at this, across the bottom is just a representation of some of the systems that we pull data from. We pull data from dozens of systems, which pull data from dozens of systems. So hundreds of different systems are represented in EMDS in order for us to have that foundation for the data that we need. And then as we work our way up, we're incorporating new technologies or new standards that the Army has. We have one here called the Army Organizational Server. And then we bring it all into EMDS. We do a tremendous amount of work on it in order to get it so that it's presentable. And then we utilize web browser to share it across the Army, regardless of where you may be anywhere in the world, as long as you've got access to the Army's classified network. And then the last thing is that we lay that all over what we call ARFORGEN, the Army Force Generation Model, our ability basically to do supply chain management. How do we keep troops and equipment and training coming in one end of this conveyor belt and outputting qualified units that can go to any contingency that we have worldwide and do their job. And then when they're finished, take them back to the beginning of the conveyor belt and fix all that's broken, whether it be people, equipment, training, or whatever it may be, and just keep revolving them through that. So our data discovery piece within EMDS is, for us, a critical piece of how you get to the analytics. You've got to take this information from all of these different systems, bring it into one place, and you've got to put it in a way that people can, or present it in a way that people can understand it. And you've got to do it in such a way that they can go ask their questions, as we saw demonstrated earlier in the Watson Analytics. In our ARFORGEN cop view that I'm showing here is one of the many different views, and these are mock-ups, by the way, because so if there's any classified police in here, this is not classified data. But this mock-up that I'm showing here basically represents a way that we get access to data. So if you've ever been to Lowe's or Home Depot or Walmart online and shopped, in many, many hundreds of other systems, you'd recognize some of the capabilities that we're utilizing here because we're trying to take advantage of COTS software in order to deliver this. So you go in, you say, I'm interested in infantry units, and then the system gives you all the infantry units, and you say, well, I care about infantry units that are only manned at 90%, so it narrows it down. And so you keep getting into from over 10,000 units with over 40,000 different derivatives of those units, over 1 million people, you get to what you care about, and it's displayed to you in different analytic views so you can understand and utilize that information. One of many of the different types of screens that we do that with as far as the data discovery. The data understanding piece is that you have to do, again, what Watson was showing earlier. You've got to be able to present that information in a visual way that makes sense to people. The screen that I'm showing up here now was actually previously, about 2 years ago, distributed throughout the Army in an Excel spreadsheet to tell you what the force structure of the Army looked like over the next 6 years. Okay? So we took that, and it's coming out of a great system, but their system was a small stovepipe system that was built to build this Army force structure, not to share it out to the masses. And we needed to share it out to the masses out there. So we consumed their data, we worked with the stakeholders, and we built a screen that starts off at this one view that gives you access to the entire Army force structure for the next 6 years, whatever piece that you care about looking at, whether it's infantry units or engineer units or truck driving units or whatever it may be, or you care about your state, so you're a senator or a representative. Any of those in here, by the way? Okay. You care about your state, and you want to know what the Army is doing with X type of unit that may impact a fort in your state 3 years from now. And this gives you the access to all that information there. But it gives it to you in a very clear and easy to understand view. So the so what of this is when you're talking about analytics, you're really talking about analysis. And that analysis is going on every single day in the Army or in the morning when you get up. How many people tried on 2 different outfits this morning? I did not, but you know, I am happily married, and my wife normally does a lot of analysis in the morning on what she might wear. And so we take all of that data and all of the options and we present those to you so that you've got, we narrow them where we can so that you spend less time pulling that information together and more time doing the analysis. So in my wife's case, we've organized her clothes in the closet so that shoes and dresses and belts that all kind of go together so she can get to it quicker, which is the iceberg on the right over here. She can do more analysis on that. In our belief, not only do we need to bring all that data together for you so that you can do that analysis, but we also need to lean forward on doing that analysis for you. So we spend a lot of time with our stakeholders talking about what do you care about? When you're sitting in front of a screen full of data, what's going through your head that you're thinking about, which is that analysis, to try to make a decision. And the more of that we can pull to the front end of our system, the more they can spend time on other things that matter to them or doing deeper analysis as opposed to simply gathering data and doing basic analysis. So the key takeaway here is that with EMDS, the system I'm talking about, single point of entry, enterprise analytics, and I'll talk about that enterprise here for just a second. Many of the systems that do analytics do, and I had a great conversation with a couple of Army ORSAs out here in the audience earlier. You have data kind of gets to a point, and then there's the smart guy or girl that then does analysis on that. And it's our belief that we ought to be able to push that as far to the tip of the spear as possible so that the end user is not a 2-star, 1-star general. The end user becomes closer and closer to the front line, and they have access to that in the analytics. So when I use the word up there, enterprise analytics view, we're really talking about, we're pulling all the data in from into one place, but more importantly, if you are a sergeant at a battalion somewhere in the world, you can have access to this system and you can do analytics on your organization and like-type organizations as well. So that's about EMDS. I want to just touch base briefly on an initiative that was actually near and dear to Mr. Wallace, and he's been a very passionate supporter, and it's called the Global Force Information Management. The Army has come to the realization that this lack of standards, this lack of, or this myriad of stovepipe systems is causing us multiple problems. One of those problems is it's inhibiting our ability to globally manage our forces. How do we move forces around, and how do we manage those forces? So we've always got the right array of forces everywhere in the world. They've got the right capabilities, and anytime anything on the ground changes, we're able to kind of rack and stack those again in order to get the new fresh look at what we're doing. So last summer, the Army G3 stood up this organization, which I lead, called the Global Force Information Management Capability Office. And what we are doing is we are pulling together a couple of dozen systems that touch global force management, and we're going to look at a standardization, get rid of stovepiping, standardize our contracting, get these things all permanently funded, but also try to figure out how we can give additional capabilities to the Army. One of those is this dynamic force structure up here. Right now in the Army, if you were to look at the organizational structure for the Army, you could go find that answer for what's the org structure in the Army. The problem is that it's changing every day, hundreds of times. And if you want that dynamically, it's nearly impossible. And one of the systems that Mr. Wallace mentioned was the IPSA, the new pay and personnel system that's coming to life. One of the challenges that system and other ERPs that the Army has, such as the ones for logistics as well as the ones for contracting and so on, is that they need to know who belongs to whom every minute of every day, because we have this auditability challenge that Congress gave us a couple years back and told us that we have to have completed by the end of FY17. And in order to do that, we either have to do what we're doing now, which is spending many millions of dollars a year with literally teams of people managing the dynamic force structure, or we've got to figure out a way to automate it. There are 6 major capabilities in this. Right now, the one that I was just talking about was actually number 2 up there, provide a common framework for force structure and command relationships. So C2, command and control relationships. Now I want to talk a little bit about predictive analytics, because these are all tied together. EMDS, big data system, analytics evolving into predictive analytics. So for those of you who are familiar with predictive analytics, you're probably familiar with Eric Siegel, wrote a great book. It's a great read if you haven't read that, because it kind of really starts talking about the art of the possible with predictive analytics. And he said here, the potency of prediction is pronounced as long as the predictions are, and actually what he said, are better than guessing. Now I added in the word noticeably. Is Eric here, by the way? He is not. So I wanted to apologize, but I added in the word noticeably because noticeably is important to users individually. So if I came to you and said, I can predict with a 50.5% accuracy level, which is better than guessing, then you may go, well, that's good enough. But if you're a general who's about to send troops into harm's way, you may say, well, I need a 90% confidence ratio, or I need whatever confidence in order to do that. So it is better than guessing, but it depends on the stakeholder as to whether it's good enough or not. So predictive analytics, I believe it was Ann that spoke first, was talking about predictive versus prescriptive. Our hope is that not only can we predict, that we can also do prescriptive. So as Mr. Wallace was talking about it, if he was still here, he'd be so proud of the fact that I was kissing up so much to him on using his name here. But it is important to be able to predict and then prescribe. Because if you're one of those 4,200 people that he named out that are in that pool of high risk for suicide, you just got predicted. I would like to be one of those that prescribed the right course of action in order to eliminate or minimize the number of suicides that are happening there. So that's where we're headed with it. The prediction point, though, gives us something to start with. So the art of the possible, for those that may not be as familiar with predictive analytics, we're talking about large amounts of data, and where does that data tell us we're going to go, or where is it possible that we're going to go? And we really talk about possibilities versus probabilities. It is possible that today a meteor will hit Washington, D.C. It is probably not probable. So you tie those two together. What are all the things that could indeed happen? And then what has the highest probability, the highly likely to happen versus least likely to happen? Now, a lot of real-world examples of predictive analytics. You can see some of the examples up here, but what I really want to talk about is Target. Now, why is an Army guy talking about predictive analytics and Target? Because it's a good example that you relate to, that you can see where we're headed with the analytics out here. So this is the model that Target created on how they were going to find out all this stuff about their customers. So for those earlier, when I believe it was Ann talking about data scientists, and I've already had conversations with several data scientists in here, this is probably getting you really excited. For the rest of us, what this really means is that if you move, if you breathe, if you do anything that is in any way associated with Target or shopping, or in this case, babies, Target wants to know about it. Because what they want to do is they want to take that information and they want to figure out if you're pregnant or not. Now, this is actually a real-world example. This happened back 4 or 5 years ago, and it made big-time news for a couple of days. But Target realized that there were areas within their business that they could use predictive analytics to try to grow their customer base. And one of those was with pregnancies. And they had an easy way to figure out who was pregnant, because they'd go in and they'd fill out the paperwork for the baby registry. But what they realized was that there were a lot of customers walking through the store that were either thinking about being pregnant or were pregnant, and they had not told Target yet. So Target wanted to be able to predict who those customers were with a high probability so they could market to those and literally make billions of dollars as a result of it. So there are different things up here that they cared about. So they created a baby registry so they would know, what do people who are pregnant, or what are they willing to share with us? Oh, well, I tell you this, tell you this, tell you this. And oh, by the way, now that I'm in your system, every time I run my credit card through here, you'll know what I'm buying. And you'll know when I was 6 weeks pregnant versus 6 months pregnant that I was buying these types of items. So Target used that data, historical data and current data about customers, and started looking at it and saying, well, what's it telling us? Well, what's it telling us is that when you buy unscented lotion, you may be around the beginning of the second trimester. When you buy more cotton balls. Now, my wife and I bought 400 cotton balls the other day at Walmart. I hope when I get home today she doesn't have a surprise for me, but it did indeed happen. So, but these are the kinds of things that we can start to kind of foresee the future. Have you ever been in a grocery store or in any store and you get a receipt about this long, and then on the back of it it's all these coupons? Target utilized those to help refine their data. So if you bought unscented lotion, and then we gave you a receipt with a coupon on the back for scent-free soap, and you used that coupon, we had another data point about you because we're tracking every purchase by your credit card or your debit card or your checking account number. Then they could build that database there. They also would hopefully get you to sign up for something. You've never been in there, they say, if you'll fill out this online survey, we'll give you a $5 coupon or $10, whatever. Now we've got your data so we can start email marketing and see what you actually bite on in order to build our database. So they did all these things, and lo and behold, what happened is they were able to start successfully identifying that they think customer A is pregnant, because they were eventually able to get that customer to sign up for their baby registry, and that helped them continue to improve their model in order to do this. Now, the funny story of this is down here for us of us in Washington, D.C., we always talk about don't do anything you don't want on the front page of the Washington Post. Andrew Pohl, who was giving this briefing at one of Eric Siegel's seminars on predictive analytics with a bunch of data geeks, they're talking about how do you actually do predictive analytics. And one of the things that he said is, well, we really don't want to do anything, mislead or use information wrong that might get us in the newspaper or the TV. And Andrew was successful in avoiding that coverage. But a couple of months later, when Eric Siegel's book came out, Predictive Analytics, he was being interviewed on TV, and one of the questions was, well, do you know an organization that's used predictive analytics to make money with? And he said, yeah, Target predicts who's pregnant. And then they send all these mailers and stuff out. And through some crazy coincidence, this guy was watching this TV coverage, and the day before, he'd gotten in the mail a mailer to his 16-year-old daughter for some sort of lotion stuff, from Target, by the way. And he tied those two together. The story went nationwide about how Target was invading your privacy. And it was covered on every major news channel. If you go YouTube it right now, you'll find all the news coverage from back when that was going on. So you have to be careful how you use this, which applies to us in the government. We have to be careful how we use predictive analytics. We have to be careful that we set the right expectations and that we manage that process. And that when we talk about the art of the possible, we talk about the art of increasing your confidence that an outcome is probable, not that we know what the right answer is. So I've already covered all that. So where's the Army using predictive analytics? You've heard multiple stories from Mr. Wallace, but we're using it in multiple places right now. We've also had some failures. So the fourth item down there, JLAT, one of the examples where we tried to do it and we didn't do it well. EMDS, we are trying to do it right now, and we hope we will do it well and be one of the success stories up there. General Campbell, and you saw this $65 million number up there on Mr. Wallace's slides. General Campbell, who was the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army at the time, now is a CENTCOM commander and spending most of his time over in Afghanistan. This is reaching the highest levels, that predictive analytics has great potential, and we'd be foolish, basically, if we ignored what it's telling us and what we can do with it. So what are the lessons learned? Analytics require other skills than traditional database skills. So if you're hiring someone, you want to try to do this type of stuff, even if you want to do analytics, you can't simply say, oh, you're a DBA, or you've consumed data, you know how to do ETL and build a data warehouse and on. Because there really is a little bit of art and science in this. And so you've got to think about the types of team members that you bring in. And I have found in our organization that that's real challenging. The technology is important, and I'll give a nod to IBM for hosting this today, because the technology really is important. But at the end of the day, your people are more important than the technology. And IBM has fantastic product, their Watson Analytics and their SPSS especially. But there are numerous organizations, some of which I have seen their vendors out here today that I have personally spoken to previously and seen their systems that provide wonderful pieces of software or tools that you can attach to your data sources in order to perform analytics. I was speaking last week, and I got asked a question, what would you do different now versus 5 years ago? I said, I would love to start a predictive analytics practice somewhere today, because the skills for the people walking in the door are significantly better than they were 5 years ago, and the tools that you can get are significantly better. And one of the things I haven't talked about is the willingness to share the data is significantly better than it was 5 years ago. Some of you had evil grins on your faces indicating maybe you're not sharing your data. But believe me, that is one of the huge pains you have to get over when you're trying to do this type of thing. And you've got to be a visionary. You've got to help people understand what the art of the possible is. Now, I believe that I may have a couple minutes left. I don't know, unless someone starts kicking me off. Does anyone have a question that I might be able to answer before I leave the stage? Okay? No questions? Okay, thank you very, very much. Y'all have a great afternoon.